Members, we have a little bit of housekeeping arrangement. The leading inquirer. I know that the officials are very busy. I don't want to hold them up just for listening to issues not related to them. I have decided we'll ask the IRD, and then after we finish with the IRD, then Mr. Lam will ask question on the HAD, and we've decided not to ask the SWD and the Lands Department today. So, but we will reserve our questions for the next meeting for you. So you may now leave. Mr. Lau, after we finish with the IRD, we will put questions to you. I know that you are going to leave very... so thank you to the Directors of Social Welfare and Lands. Okay, let us deal with the IRD. I give the Commissioner on the whole concept. It is very, very complicated. People are watching. Section 88 is very important. The Section 88 organizations provide service to the community. Many people are benefited. How they make use of Section 88, how they regulate the use of Section 88. We will ask our questions, and then we'll move on to questioning Mr. Lau Kwong-wah, Secretary for Home Affairs. But we ask the Commissioner first. In dealing with Section 88, in confirming whether the organization has the Section 88 status, we consider various criteria. The organization have to show us the governance instrument, their objects, the terms, their assets, incomes. Their incomes cannot be used for non-charitable purposes. And in winding up, how are they going to distribute the assets? They also have to produce documents. If they have been set up for a period of time, they have to show us what sort of activities they have organized in line with charitable purposes. For those who are about to be set up, they have to show us their plans for the coming 12 months, whether their activities are in line with charitable purposes. If they have been set up for more than 18 months, they have to furnish us with their financial accounts or financial statements. We will have to know their incomes and expenditures, whether the money spent are for charitable objects. In order to, and all these are important in deciding whether we can confirm or recognize their tax exemption status. Having studied all these instruments or documents, if we find something unclear, we will issue letters questioning the office bearers or the responsible persons. And if they can satisfy us, then we can recognize their exemption status. Having given them the exemption status, we have to confirm whether they keep on doing what they have proclaimed. And therefore, we will conduct reviews from time to time. If we obtain information from other channels concerning doubts about their status, then we'll conduct a review. We seek reports from them. We want to know what activities they've conducted. We want to confirm whether what they have done are in line with the charitable purposes. We also check their financial statements. If we find certain items we have to follow up, we want to clarify, we will issue letters to such organizations asking for further information or evidence to make sure that the money spent for the implementation of the charitable purposes. If it is found that in the review, the organizations do not answer our questions or ignore us, then we can revoke the tax exemption status. If they reply that they have not organized any activities or they do not intend to organize further activities, then we can also revoke the tax exemption status. If serious breaches are found, and such breaches go against the charitable purposes, then we may consider revoking the tax exemption status. The Commissioner, in exercising your exemption for giving tax exemption status, what are the criteria for continuing the granting of Section 88 status? Whether it is what is the test of proportionality and test of materiality concerning the breaches? Say the organization received 50 million. Better not use the number 50 million. Too sensitive, Mr. Chairman. Say they spent $5,000 in breach of charitable purpose. How can you exercise your discretion from society's perspective, from the benefits of such of the activities organized by the organization? I hope you can explain this. Is it 2.6a? 2.16a? You have no power to prescribe what action to be taken, but you have the power to recognize or not to recognize the tax exemption status. Well, let me explain. When there is a prima facie evidence that certain activities are in breach of the governance instrument, as explained by as said by the chairman, we consider the nature of the breach. Why there was the breach? We look at the facts. The facts are the starting point for handling a case. We ask for the reason for the breach. Say, for example, you are concerned about directors' remuneration, whether the money spent is in line with charitable purposes. We consider how the money is spent, for what purpose is the money spent. No one should be allowed to make use of the status of charitable organization to benefit himself or herself. The money should be spent for the implementation of charitable, for achieving charitable purposes. We consider the amount spent, the nature of the breach, and the remedial measure, and whether the remedial measure is reasonable and acceptable. If it is acceptable, then we can still recognize the tax exemption status. But if there is a serious breach, then we will make use of our authority in the law to revoke the tax exemption status. Thank you. Tanya. Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, please speak into the microphone. Last time, I asked a question in respect of Cap 1, Section 41. Now, in today's paper is Gen 7. I read the English version, page 18. The answer is Roman 5. G, Roman 5, an explanation is given in respect of how they understand Section 41 of Cap 1. I hope the Deputy Secretary, not Under Secretary. He looks like the Under Secretary. Now that's page 15 of the Chinese version, Roman 3. Roman 5, rather. That's the legal advice from the DOJ. Section 41 of Cap 1. It refers to the general powers of the public officers, but the DOJ is the view that it cannot confer IRD the power to add extra conditions for exemption or to impose the same on an institution in addition to those conditions which are specifically set out by the legislature under Section 88. Section 88 is a tax exemption arrangement. The Commissioner can revoke the status under special circumstances, but no specific conditions can be added. So what he can do is to revoke or not to revoke. Now, as for refund, do you regard this as an additional condition? The Deputy Secretary, Ms. Chen's understanding is right. Under the IRO, there is no specific penalty which the Commissioner can impose on certain breaches. There is no specific authorization to that. As for the authority given to the Commissioner is under Section 88. If he is not satisfied that the charitable purpose is achieved, then the tax exemption status can be revoked. My final question on this issue is this. The Deputy Secretary has answered this, and that's in respect of legal advice in 2003. The majority of the legal advice has been given to us. I understand that he has given an explanation. The DOJ's advice, according to LPP, that is to protect the client. The client is the IRD. If the IRD permits the disclosure, then we can read this. Chairman, you may have a different view. The PAC has the power to require documents from you, and we seldom invoke such powers unless it is a very important issue in respect of public interest. And we also respect the view of the government departments. Maybe they don't want us to see this. In respect of the DOJ's advice in 2003, you may not disclose it publicly, but we are willing to read the document with you in camera. You have already told us 90% of the advice. The paper is not too long. I don't know whether you may talk to the DOJ so that we do not spend time on asking questions concerning the paper. If we have read the paper, many of the questions may have already been answered. You may not need to just answer the questions orally. Yes, we want to fully cooperate with the PAC. As for the way and means of sharing the legal advice with the PAC, we can talk to this secretariat. The chairman represents the committee. The chairman asks the question on behalf of the committee. The question. You are unable to answer the question. We respect your view, but we have many questions involving the 2003 legal advice. Just like the Law Reform Committee report, we've read through it. That's what we did, that's what we are doing, and that's what we will do. If we find the document important, we have to read it. We do not want to write a report from our own perspective about that document. We need to get to the facts. What exactly is the fact? I hope you understand our requirement. Yes, that point is fully understood. Tanya is also about the LRC report. We still have the chance to do so. We now move on to ask questions in relation to Mr. Lau Kwong-wah. Is it part 5? Well, I have just started. I have not finished my question with the IRD. I'm afraid that part can be shorter. The IRD will have to be present all the way through. Okay. Well, the director of bureau may not be able to attend the meeting next time, so I want to ask questions concerning the policy aspect. Yes, part 5 then. I want to ask the director of bureau in respect of the regulation of Chinese temples. Now, paragraph 5.1 says that the CTO was specifically enacted in 1928 to suppress and prevent mismanagement of Chinese temples and abuses of donated funds. That is a CTC, Chinese Temples Committee, to manage the temples. What is your role in the committee, Mr. Lau? I'm the chairman. Did you attend the meetings? I attend the meeting every time.
So how frequent are the meetings? Secretary, so there are some main meetings, some are committee meetings. Well, I attend about 2 or 3 meetings per year. Yes, 2. Can you as first tell us something about the Chinese temples? Well, for the financial issues, I'll defer to the Deputy Secretary later on. But I want to say that under the regulation of Chinese temples, we do have many temples under that. So we do need the CTC was established to carry out the duties. And every time we would review the temples, and so we would follow up on the process of the temples. I would like to defer to the Deputy Secretary to talk about the Chinese Temples Fund. Yes, there are actually 2 funds under that. One is the Chinese Temples Fund. The other is the General Chinese Charities Fund. For as of 2015, the Chinese Temples Fund, we have 65 million in income, expenses 50 million, and a profit of 12 million. And in 2015, for the General Chinese Charities Fund, we have 30 million in income, expenses 25 million, and then we have a profit of 7.9 million. So altogether, the 2 funds added together, we have 92.7 million in income, and expenses is 75.3 million, and profit is 20.4 million. So according to a market value of 2017, a Chinese Temples fund portfolio talking about is 837 million. And then also 178 million in investments. Thank you. So we can, of course, the committee is very important because you have to manage a large number of Chinese temples with huge funding. Or the secretary said he attended 2 meetings per year. You're talking about the main meetings, right? And secretary also said there are some committee meetings and other working groups, right? How many working groups are there? Some are responsible for maintenance, some for events, and some finances, investments. And each committee will have its own chairman, and the secretariat will act as support. Well, as the chair of the main body, would you have updates on the process or activities of each committee? Secretary, each time after the meetings, the committees will record the minutes, and we do discuss at the main meeting or at the board meeting the progress of each committee. Secretary, so you are very clear of the highlights of the work in each committee, am I correct? Yes. So, Secretary, I would like to refer you to paragraph 5.7. Well, I'll give you a background. A temple managed by Organization A since 2006 did not have a delegation agreement in force. The CTC had tried to introduce some new requirements in the new requirement. For example, requiring the delegated organization to repair and maintain the temple at its own expenses and to submit audited accounts and administrative reports. But met with opposition by Organization A. In the meantime, donations and other revenues were kept and used by Organization A without accountability to the CTC. Additionally, Organization A disputed the ownership of the land on which the temple stands and refused to enter into a delegation agreement with the CTC. And there was no record to show that the CTC had followed up with Organization A since 2007. Chairman, I'd like to first ask the Secretary, well, you bear 2 responsibilities. One, as the Secretary for Home Affairs and also the Chair of the CTC. When did you start to act as Chair for the CTC? So when I came on board as Secretary for Home Affairs, I chaired the meeting at the first CTC meeting. So which year are you talking about? It should be, well, I came on board 2015, but I'm not sure which month I started to chair the committee. Alright, so you came on board in 2015. And then you also have a political responsibility. There might have been you need to bear political responsibility for other issues. Well, I'm not going to talk about those before 2015. Let me talk about 2015 and after. We're now in 2017. How could you allow a temple to operate without a delegation agreement for so long, and there has been no follow-up since 2007? So first of all, do you know about the case of Organization A before you receive the recommendations from the Audit Commission? Well, we have always been in negotiation with Organization A, so I knew of this when I became chair. Oh, the secretary said they have been in communication with Organization A, but then the audit report stated that there was no record to show that CTC had followed up with Organization A since 2007. So what does that mean? Director of Audit, can you explain that? Let me defer to the Assistant Director. Para 5.7a was written after reviewing the HAB papers, and there was no record to show that the CTC had followed up with Organization A. We did a show in writing how this was put to the HAB before, and they had no objection to this. Secretary. This organization has relations with the Hershey Cook, and therefore we have been following up with this case. Or do you have any information or records to show us that there has been communication between you and the CTC? Mr. Lam, Chairman. Is it because it is related to Hershey Cook that there has been no record? Mr. Lau, Secretary Lau. No, that's not the case. When Organization A refused to sign the delegation agreement, we're talking about 10 years ago, they were of the view that they were of a different view about the ownership of the land, and we also shared with them our views. But since it involved some people living there and the land it was on, we needed not only the committee to follow up, we also needed to invite the Home Affairs to follow up, and so there has not been any conclusion as of today. We didn't think it was ideal as well, and so we hope to enhance our communication with Organization A. Secretary, do you confirm that you have communicated with Organization A, and the Home Affairs has no written records of this kind of communication and follow-up? Well, according to my records, in March of this year, the outlying islands also, Home Affairs Department also sent out an email, and there was a record on that. But of course, this was not a record of a negotiation. It was actually an email given to our secretariat after discussion. Has the Audit Commission ever seen records of a negotiation between CTC and Organization A? Thank you. Well, in our audit, we reviewed HAB's papers and documents. We didn't go to the HAD to explore other papers. So this was what we saw from following up with HAB. There was a paper which was given to us by the HAB on previous cases in relation to Chinese temples. And Organization A was mentioned that after meeting with with the Rural Committee in 2006, there has not been any further communication. Mr. Lam. Well, so you said after September of 2006, there has not been any negotiations carried out with the Rural Committee, right? Well, the paper was as of July 31st, 2016. I'm sorry, Chairman. Do we have this paper? Where can we see that? No, we don't have this paper, but we can ask for it. I think you really need to submit this paper to us, otherwise it's hard for us to follow up. But it seems that the Audit Commission has a record that was in September 2006. No, that was what was provided to us. Oh, Secretary, so what do you have to say to that? Oh, where's the question? What's the question? Oh, so there has not been follow-up since September 2006 according to you, but you said that the HAD has always been following up, so is that a discrepancy or not? Chairman, I'd like the Audit Commission to clarify that you only reviewed the cases in HAB. We provided all the papers to the Audit Commission when you asked for it, but this was a conclusion they reached only from the papers from HAB. But we do have a secretariat, an individual secretariat under the CTC. Well, I wear two hats. I'm the chair of the committee. I'm also the secretary for Home Affairs. But there's an individual secretariat under the CTC, and we do have sub-records. For example, in 2016, a working group was still discussing this, which is the Committee on Finances. The outlying islands HAD also dealt with the district office, and so there was email communication. Oh, that's all right, Mr. Lam. We can ask for the papers before we follow up. Well, I also want to see those papers. I would like the Audit Commission to address one more question. Did you only review the files at HAB? Have you ever contacted the district offices or the Chinese Temples Committee Secretariat to see whether any follow-up has been carried out since 2006 in relation to Organization A? Well, we contacted the Secretariat under the CTC. All the papers and the questions raised were done after communication with the Secretariat of the CTC. Did you show the draft of this report to CTC or to the HAB? Yes, we sent it to the HAB. How about to the CTC? I'm not sure. Well, we didn't give it directly to the CTC, but I'm not sure whether they saw it indirectly. We did send it to the HAB. The HAB is responsible for Chinese temples policies, and therefore you submitted it to the HAB. Am I understanding you correctly? Well, yes. We sent it to the Secretariat of the CTC, which is under the HAB, so with the staff of the HAB. So you directly sent it to the Secretariat of the CTC. Oh, sorry, I need to clarify. We gave it to the HAB. Well, I think you have to be clear. You have to clarify because I'm getting confused. Well, even though it's still under a government department, we usually, by practice, submit it to the related bureau. So, our draft was sent to the HAB. But we addressed it to the HAB, but the staff also worked for the CTC. Well, we do have a contact person who is under the HAB responsible for CTC. Okay, so you submitted to the HAB because of course there would be different colleagues in charge of different responsibilities. Mr. Lam, Chairman, why we ask this question? Because we have to clarify whether the HAB and the CTC together with the Secretariat followed up with the case. So we want to ask whether Mr. Lau has seen the papers, the documents, and followed up on the cases. Well, the Audit Commission now has been clear. All the papers and documents, including the draft of the report and asking for files, all went through the HAB to the CTC Secretariat. So, Secretary, how do you explain the discrepancy between what you said? Because it's shown that in the Audit Commission said there's been no follow-up with Organization A since 2006, but you said that there has been follow-up. So how do you deal with this discrepancy?
Sorry, I can't hear you. Would you please speak into the microphone? Perhaps when the Audit Commission was making inquiries, they were looking at a record of the HAB. I don't know if the Audit Commission asked for minutes of meeting of the CTC. I will ask the Assistant Director of Audit to answer. Please speak into the microphone. Well, it was the Secretariat that gave us the information. Which Secretariat? The Secretariat of the CTC? Now the HAB. Well, if they can't explain it away, they will have to come back. It doesn't really matter that he has to come back 10 times more. Well, now that we have two different versions, perhaps we will first look at what kind of documents they are, and then we will follow up on that. Can you give us all the documents? And then we'll know. Okay, I will just put it on hold. And I would like to address another point before I hand over to another member. Paragraph 5.11. It is page 98 in the English version. I will first explain it on account of TV audience. According to the delegation agreement, the income of a delegated temple must be applied in the first instance to the due observance of the customary ceremonies of the temple and the maintenance of the temple, the lots and the assets, fittings and properties therein. Any surplus shall be applied to pay the salaries of those staff responsible for managing the temple and the expenses of the delegated organization in compliance with the agreement and for the purposes of Chinese charity in Hong Kong. In scrutinizing the submitted accounts for the 5 temples under Organization D's management for the year ended December 2015, Audit noted that there was a staff missing expenditure of about $380,000. The Audit Commission found that the expenditure of the operating expenditure of the temple were not proportional. A staff remuneration stood at $301,000, and which was higher than the $133,000 incurred in the previous year. So that means in 2015 they have consumed $380,000 worth of food, and then it was more. Let me continue reading it. However, the CTC had not sought clarifications from Organization D. The CTC needs to tighten up the provisions in delegation agreements so as to ensure that temple funds are properly spent. Please ask your question. Do you know how many staff members, full-time and part-time, under Organization D? Secretary. As far as I know, that there is no direct full-time or part-time staff members. They have voluntary workers working, say for example, on cleaning, on ceremonies. Well, then I'm more confused than before. How come you pay voluntary workers? Well, do you know what a voluntary worker is? For 5.11a, we see that there was an amount of $301,000 on salary expenditure, and now you say that they are voluntary workers. Well, voluntary means that they don't work for a wage. The Commission Director of Audit, I think it should be the Secretary to answer. But this reports from the Audit Commission. Yes, you're right, Chairman. Thank you. I will defer to the Assistant Director. Thank you. Under 5.11, the figures thereon, we have look at the audited report of Organization D. Is in English. It says
就係30萬 ，OK 好1000，咁就嗰個有一個叫做 staff missing，即係話所謂如果中文譯就係
staff missing and staff salary. This may be the case. The organization may have more than one temple, five in fact, and there may be some staff wages on other services. The figure I mentioned was in relation to the temple only. They were expenditure related to voluntary workers. The missing expenditure is also that of voluntary workers. Then can you explain what this $300,000 is? I don't have the information in relation to the entire organization because that is the amount for the entire organization. And now we only focus on the expenditure on temples. This organization oversees 5 temples. I was listening intently to what Mr. Lau said in his first paragraph. He uses 3 ifs. If this organization this, if this organization that. Don't talk about what if. Get the information and come to talk to us about the facts. Don't guess. Because your guess may be right and it may equally be wrong. So please go back and look at the information. Check it. First of all, how many staff members, paid staff members under this organization? Because just now the Secretary said they are voluntary workers. And according to the audit's report, the staff salary previously was only 301,000. However, it became 380,000. So, are they staff missing expenditure, staff salary expenditure, or the two together, or staff missing expenditure plus voluntary worker staff missing expenditure? Please go back to get the information for follow-up. I think the secretary has to come again. He is not on top of the situation. I don't think I should ask further questions. I hope officials will get all the information ready before they proffer explanations. Ms. Tanya Chan. I wasn't going to ask questions on Chinese temples, but since the secretary is here, I would like to ask questions about a number of things. Maybe let me try to ask questions about Chinese temples. What I find puzzling is that just before the release of the audit report, we had a Home Affairs panel meeting before the secretary came in to join us. I asked about the Chinese temples ordinance. I remember in 2015 the review of the ordinance was completed. However, there has been no report. And in the audit report here, it has mentioned, so 5.12. It talked about complexity and this and that. So, Secretary, can you tell us at what stage is the review of the Chinese temples ordinance? We have done a public consultation. We have reported to the HA panel. We have collected views. We are collating the views. We will come back to the LegCo to tell members about the next step and what amendments are required. I will now come back to the HAB. A couple of days ago, was it? Just a few days ago, the secretary came to us about Chapter 2. Well, there are some common documents, so I would like to follow up. Last time, the secretary said that the report of the Law Reform Commission, it was December 2013 when the LRC released the report. And the first meeting was in 2015, 11th of August, and the second one was 16 months after that, the 4th of October 2016. The secretary explained that it involves 9 bureaus and 9 departments, so 18 in total. So I would like to ask the secretary, Mr. Lau, to name these 9 departments and 9 bureaus. Well, if you can't do that, you can give us on paper. Sorry, but I suspect that the secretary himself is wrong. If I understand it correctly, it's 9 bureau and departments. Perhaps we'll hear from the Deputy Secretary. Secretary. Yes, indeed, in the report there was a stroke. Perhaps we will look at the information before coming back to you. I am afraid that what the secretary said has been widely reported, so it gave the impression that it was tough work. So I want to ask the secretary, in response to LRC's report, who is responsible for responding to the LRC report under the HAB. It's next to me, the Deputy Secretary. Really? According to the organization chart, there is an Assistant Secretary. Well, the supervisor of the Assistant Secretary is the Deputy Secretary. Do you think it's not easy for this colleague? Because according to those public affairs, there is in relation to Chinese Temple Committee and to reply to the LRC's report, the central data, entertainment licenses, including amusement center, public entertainment places, gambling, support, secretariat support, the various funds against gambling, the honor list, also justices of peace. They are all under the purview of this colleague. Do you think that maybe the colleague would need some assistance? I agree that there's quite a lot under the portfolio of this colleague, and Ms. Chan has correctly pointed out various duties of this post. The Deputy Secretary's scope of duty is even wider. Our colleague will endeavor to do best. Well, it's been over a year when the recommendations of the LRC were followed up on. The LRC published the report in December 2013. In a month, we started consultation. So I think the Assistant Secretary has performed their duty. R68/2/Gen 1. We have emails, information about work of the Assistant Secretary. Have you gone through them? It's Appendix B. It's here. It's Appendix B, right? I don't only see an annex, 100-page or so. R68/2/Gen 1. It's in Gen 1, page 9. No. Well, there is Annex, Appendix A and B. Well, has the Secretary read the information before coming to us? Well, it's the Deputy Secretary who is responsible for the meeting, so I think it's the Deputy Secretary to ask who would read the information paper. Yes. So I can only ask information of the Deputy Secretary. If the Secretary doesn't read the documents, then why is he here to answer questions? I think it's for the administration to decide who is to answer questions, and it's their responsibility and their duty to read all the information. As per the Secretary said that in December 2013, the LRC published its report. And Mr. Lau took office on the 21st of July 2015. Drafting of the reply to the LRC. Your colleague started its work in June 2015, and a number of departments attended the interdepartmental meeting. I identified 9: HAD, Efficiency Unit, FSTB, FHB, LWB, HAD, IRD, Security Bureau, and the police. well, the SB and the police share the same representatives, and there is also the SWD, altogether 9. After the meeting, some members, departments have given reply. Some departments gave a reply, and on the 30th of September 2016, all of a sudden there was an email about a resumption of discussion. So I want to ask, well, I have named a lot of documents. Have they all recorded follow-up actions, coordinations in relation to the report of the LRC? DS. Whether it is documents in preparation for the 2 meetings and follow-up actions, well, I wanted to say that not everything is put into writing. Some are done over the phone, so it won't be on the record. And to answer members' question, 9 plus 9, we said. In the first meeting, prior to the meeting, well, in relation to one of the recommendations of the LRC, statutory definition of charitable objects, it would involve a lot of bureaus. If we can gather comments on paper about the statutory definition of a charitable object, then we would be able to do it. So it's not necessarily for all bureaus to attend the first meeting. In the first meeting, we were talking about through what channel we would deal with the definition, or what avenue or what departments where we will need for the registration regime and also the regulatory regime.
As for the number of departments and bureaus attending the meeting, the total number is more than those that attended our first meeting. Now, according to the paper, you focused on 4 items. Some bureaus and departments didn't need further contact after the first meeting. And that is not true. Members might have already asked the question. Say, for example, the Security Bureau. It gave its view on a certain definition. It was not represented at the first meeting, but it did attend subsequent meetings. The departments concerned have to know, have to follow up, and they are informed as well. Can you explain why there is a gap of 16 months? Why suddenly, on the 30th of September 2016, an email was suddenly issued? Was it related to the investigation of the Audit Commission? Now, if you look at the paper, you can see that the theme or the subject of the 2 meetings, they had different objectives. The first one was focused on broader issues raised by the LRC in respect of legal definition, registration, transparency, disclosure, a standardized regulatory regime. They are all policy issues. As for follow-up work, one of the conclusions was that certain directions had been discussed, certain things shouldn't be implemented at that juncture. We were responsible for coordination. We asked the departments concerned to substantiate their views and so that we could consider the matter further. So the meeting was longer, as observed by the department. Different departments gave follow-up views. After we follow up the matter for a certain time, the policy-wise, the policy issues will need more time. Therefore, you can see that at the second meeting, there were less officials attending the meeting. We focus on raising funds in public. That involves the SWD, the HAD, and FEHD. They have laws giving the authorization or approval. We therefore invited relevant departments to discuss fundraising, how transparency and the right to know can be safeguarded. And also we want to consider easier ways to put all information together. So there was the one-stop finder. So the second meeting was more technical. It is not about the gap between the first and second meeting. We discussed the short-term measures at the second meeting for enhancing transparency, and also discussed the administrative measures. The nature of the two meetings were different. I want to ask the Secretary, was it because you knew that the Audit Commission started to investigate you, so you had the email on the 30th of June 2016? Did you reject this argument or this point? As I said, concerning the 4 areas, one was handled at the second meeting, and at the first meeting there was no time to discuss that issue. On the 30th of September, issued by Ms. Grace Lee, what was the first paragraph? You can read it out.
They recall that HAB convened an interdepartmental meeting last year to discuss the possible way forward in response to the recommendations made by the Law Reform Commission's report on charities. This email serves to revive discussion on this issue and propose a meeting with you. Revive.
Revive 咗，咁佢開咗，即係我唔係幫佢解釋，佢開咗一次。
Well, they had the first meeting and they had the second meeting, so I know it's a follow-up. I understand, but there were a lot of exchanges back and forth. Why they use the word revive? Well, it's hard to target at each and every word or chew over each and every word. You asked them whether there was any follow-up. They had a break and then they did something else. And then they stopped for some time and they now revive it. It's unfair to explain on their behalf. Well, I didn't explain on their behalf. There was a meeting last year, and then this year they revived the meeting. I want to know how they look at it. Having read the pile of documents, I only see one department responded. The other departments had comments. But how do they understand the first paragraph of this email? Why there was this email? Why? And also in other emails, the appendices were about matters last year. If there has been progress, why there is a need to attach the documents of last year's? They have to answer why they have to revive the meeting after 1.5 years. They claim that there were exchanges. They were spoken on the line, online, or spoken on the telephone line. The PAC is searching for the facts. Just tell it the fact. As for your intention, well, we want to know the facts. Thank you, Chairman. Well, let me say it again. At the first meeting, a document pointed out several directions, one of which is enhancement of transparency and to protect the right to know. If you look at the meeting and also the follow-up work, not much ink had been spent on this part. Now we invited other departments to provide further information on the policy aspects. Quite a lot of time was spent on this. As for discussing raising funds in public and how can there be better coordination among departments, relevant departments, and how information can be put together for easy public access. These were not done at the first meeting. After we have dealt with the policy issues to a certain advanced stage, we think we need to deal with the work that was raised at the first meeting, and we need to follow that up. And therefore, we had the second meeting. So you can see that those attending the first meeting and the second meeting were different, and also the documents were different, and the direction were different. At the second meeting, the departments represented, in fact, did give their views in 2015 on time. Do you agree? Yes, I do. But there was no follow-up, right? Well, whether we could have done it faster, I believe we have the room to do so. But that was the first phase. Some of the follow-up was shifted a bit. On the 4th of October last year, having had targeted meetings with several departments, the HAB, the SWD, the HAD, the FEHD, were represented. After meeting with these departments. They do have further meetings in respect of the matters raised in 2015 with other departments, I mean. With regard to calling meetings, we didn't. In the documents attached, after October, there were follow-up emails on specific issues. And say efficiency unit was not represented at the meeting, but we did liaise with them on relevant matters. Well, I give the floor to other members. Tanya, before other members ask questions, the Director of Audit has pointed out that they have to follow up within a stipulated time frame. They were slow in responding. They had 2 meetings. At the first meeting, Mr. Lau, the secretary, said that the matter was very complicated. Now, whether we accept it or not and how we write the report is another matter. Now, you have asked the information on the response, and then we can write the report. Write our report. Now, for EC conclusion, I want to ask, for the ease of concluding, there was a reply in respect of Chapter 2. I want to ask how the HAB is going to deal with the LRC report in the number 2 report of, or rather in Chapter 2 of the PAC report. Page 74, paragraph 6.7. In May 2016, the Secretary for Justice wrote to the HAB in respect of the late response to the LRC's recommendations and late progress as well. Former charity subcommittee members had strong concerns. Therefore, the SFJ wrote a letter. In the same year, April, at the relevant panel of the Council, the chairman also raised a similar issue. After the LRC report, there was no progress. Since there were such strong calls or demands, what will the HAB to follow up in response? There are two demands. Some supported short-term and long-term. In the speaking notes, the Secretary explained the matter. You asked for a timetable, don't you? Is there a timetable? Do you impose any requirement or demand on yourself? Yes. Is there a timetable for responding to the Law Reform Commission report? How far will you go, and what will you do? You asked for timetable, right? Yes, Chairman. If you look at the issues looked into by the LRC, they started from 2007, and then they had a report in 2013, 6 years in between. And they also had public consultation. And we did a public consultation, and there was strong responses in respect of a unified registration or regulation regime that involves religious freedom. When the report was given to us, in the first month, we immediately responded. There was an immediate response. The role of the HAB, this HAB was not above all the departments or bureaus. We were appointed as the coordinator. We liaised, we called meetings. As for the response of the department or departments, it is dependent on the department itself. Now, we had the first meeting, and we had exchanges of emails, not too few of them. And as I explained, it was very complicated. What is the next step? We will consider the recommendations of the Audit Commission, and we also listen to the views of the PAC. We will not stop our work. We will continue the coordination. Now, you had 2 meetings. Will you consider calling another meeting, asking the 9 units or 18 units for an action plan as to how to respond to the recommendations of the LRC? Whether they will do it or they will not do it, they need to give an account on that. Will you consider this? Ms. Tanya Chan, is it what you want? They may call another meeting, and the departments, and each department will give a roadmap and a timetable for us in responding to the LRC report. Chairman, there are several levels. One is about short-term administrative measures. They are important. We want to have them as soon as possible. The second level is that we listen to the views of the PAC. I believe we will call an interdepartmental meeting, and we will follow up your views. We know that you do not represent all government departments. each department may have different views. Say, for example, this morning, the commissioner, the police, said he didn't agree to certain points. We have to understand. Now, you had 2 meetings. We want to know your long-term and short-term views, and then we can write the report. Thank you, Chairman. In 2011, the LLC subcommittee issued a report, did a public consultation in 2 years' time, and they finish a comprehensive report in 2 years and made a lot of recommendations. But after so many years, since the LLC report was published, there was no short-term nor long-term measures taken by the administration. That is problematic in respect. They just ignore the LLC. They also owe an explanation from the public. Yes, we're going to write a report, so you have to consider how you're going to deal with that. Next. Mr. Ho. Well, I was late. I don't know whether the question has been asked. On part 5, I have some questions on logic. 600-odd temples, 300-odd supervised by you, 250 were not supervised by you. Under 5.4a, the 250 non-registered establishments or pseudo-religious establishments were not regulated, you say. They were not regulated because various regulations providing protection remedies against frauds, malpractices, and misuses of funds. And you have no intention to supervise other Chinese temples according to paragraph 5.5. Is it really worthwhile for the CTC to continue its existence? Even if you don't have the CTC, you still have other laws regulating the temples.
If you say that, well, you don't have to manage those temples, then why do you have to spend money to monitor the registered temples? I need to look into the logic behind this, because it is not cost effective in your management. Well, Secretary, Mr. Ho pointed out that we need to also catch up with the times. This was set in 1988, and at that time, regulation was very strict. There was a registration, but then today we have reviewed it, and we have heard voices from the public that there is no need to come up with such strict enforcements. Some religious groups thought it too strict, and they ask why they need to submit all their financial reports to us. So we are right now in the process of review. We have submitted a recommendation to the government that this registration should be voluntary in the future and not compulsory. So after amending the ordinance, there wouldn't be such issues again. The panel would finish a report explaining to our committee what the way forward is. So when are you going to submit this report to us? Well, I want to know what the government is going to do in future. So can I understand that it would all become compulsory registration in the future? No, it's exactly the reverse. Well, you say registration is voluntary, then the 250 unregistered temples would not come and register themselves. Why would they want to be monitored by you? Am I misunderstanding you? No, we're not touching on policy here. Because this morning he said that he's going to submit a report to us, and I haven't read it, so we cannot just give our views without having read the report. Chairman, we are very willing to submit recommendations in amendments of the CTC ordinance. Well, yes, this was set in the 80s, and they are now going through a review. We haven't yet seen the results, and please submit it to us when you have completed it. Well, I have one more suggestion. I asked the previous question because taxpayers have paid a lot or contributed a lot to the CTC. And when there are other legislations that could monitor these religious groups, then I don't think you would need the CTC, because it's not worthwhile to keep the CTC. You either monitor all or you don't monitor any. Because even if I were a Chinese temple, I wouldn't voluntarily register it. So we need to strike a balance. We need to think of the way forward. Secretary, Chairman. As Mr. Ho stated, CTC is under the government and you're using public money. But the fact is not like that. Well, you're the chairman. Oh, can I continue, please? I'm just trying to explain the facts. These temples receive donations, and therefore not all the funding comes from the government. The secretariat is independent. I'm, as the secretary, am the only one who wears two hats. Well, but as a layman, you would only understand that there is legislation, and even though the money might not all be contributed by the government, it is because of the powers authorized to you under legislation. The general public may still think that you are using public money. Now, this is Mr. Ho's view. Well, regardless of where the money comes from. Secretary, your time is costing taxpayers as well. So I think we should really try to measure whether it is worthwhile to keep the CTC. I'm willing to first read the report before following up on the panel. I have to give some credit back to the government. It's very difficult for the HAD to manage the Chinese temples. Even for some of the Tin Hao temples, I know that many do not want to fall under CTC. And some of the temples are already built before the setting of the CTC. I've seen some people buying land, and then after the father's death, pass it to his next generation without handing it back to the Chinese temples. And so the government just now talked about issues with the rural committee. Well, there are so many people living there, and therefore, of course, there would be issues and delays. And it's difficult to reach any consensus. So I just want to let the general public know how complicated this issue is. But of course, we need to, from a governance perspective, explore the way forward. The Secretary shared with us case A and case B, and both cases were very complicated. Mr. Lam asked about the discrepancies between what is said by the Audit Commission and the Secretary. I think the government can also supply us with some paper on what has been done to follow on the issue. Well, Mr. Ho, yes, we have already requested that. Well, I accept it if you were looking at the issue from different perspectives. But if there are really huge discrepancies, I would request that you come attend the meeting again. But we might not really have the time to do that. Well, this is just my view. Well, we of course also need to monitor the government to see whether money used is worthwhile and whether public money has been wasted. It's all right, to hold more meetings. We can hold 10 or even more, but we do have to write up a report, and that takes time. Sometimes we will not even be able to complete it within 3 months, and we would seek extension from Council. Mr. Ho, I just want to reiterate that I want to read all the papers and information first. Well, yes, we are not going to come to a conclusion right now, because our usual practice is to just view the facts and then to decide the way forward. Mr. Lam, Chairman, I would like to briefly respond to what Mr. Ho said. Can you not respond to what he said? Because you talk of your views, he talk of his views. Well, I asked 2 questions to the Secretary regarding Organization A and another Organization D. The Secretary is not able to answer my question, so I request he attend the meeting again. Well, he would still have to come up 10 times if necessary. We can only write the report after getting all the answers. We don't really have to count the number of times. Well, let us, read all the facts first before we make any decisions. Tanya, and then Mr. Lam. Well, he said he hasn't finished asking his questions. Well, that's all right. Ladies first. Secretary, how do you define independent secretariat? Secretary, the secretariat is independent in hiring, and it's a non-civil servant post. Therefore, it is independent. Secretary, I'd like to confirm with the Deputy Secretary whether the CRC Secretariat is really totally independent. Where does funding for operations come from? Does it really come from the donations to the temple? Secretary, you can either address this question or you can defer to the Deputy Secretary. Well, I have already answered the question, but I see that Ms. Chen wanted to confirm the answer. Well, yes, I respect you. You're the Secretary. It's all right if you defer to the Deputy Secretary. Yes, the CTC, in accordance with legislation, has a structure separate from public funding. Well, there are a few public officers that have been seconded, but their salary is paid by the CTC fund. Tanya. So the independence comes from funding. The independence means it's the funding comes from the CTC, but those working there are civil servants. Well, in 2013, on November 27th, there was a question asking about the expenses, operation expenses, and maintenance fees. At that time, there was no mention of remuneration and salary. So that is why I want to follow up on this question. And I also want to follow on what Mr. Ho said. There is the Chinese Temples Ordinance. Because at that time there were many columbaria that stated themselves as being temples or other religious places, and the general public went to buy niche places, but those columbaria were not registered, and that is why the legislation was formulated. Secretary, do you believe that the voluntary registration would be able to resolve this issue? Well, Secretary, it's as you know, you have given us new information and we have not yet read the paper. And I can't really stop them from asking the question because you sort of gave us new information. So can you try to address that? Secretary, we're talking about two different things here. The voluntary registration and amendment for the ordinance. These are all underway, and we would need to come back to LegCo later on. So I could come and elaborate later in the panel. Oh yes, so I think the panel can follow up because this is a policy issue. Chairman, well, I'm not going to ask about the policy issue. No, I'm just telling you that, we can take two roads forward to first measure what has been done, and then to also look at it from the policy view and to explore it at the panel level, because we cannot operate outside of this nature now. Well, yes, so I want to follow up on organizations A and B. That the delegation agreement have not been renewed. So I want to see how you monitor it and how can you continue to monitor these two organizations. So this is 5.7 A and B, right? Yes. Secretary, well, these two issues need to be followed up. So our district office is going to continue negotiating with them. But as Mr. Ho has observed, some temples are closely related with the village, and therefore there are some land ownership issues that need to be followed up. Secretary, well, can you give us a timetable then? Do you have a timetable on when this can be resolved? Or because following up doesn't mean resolving the issue. Well, yes, can we go back and discuss it before giving you an answer? Yes. Now for organization B, is it also related to the rural issue? Yes. Well, you have tried to understand the situation for 10 years. And we do need to go forward. I hope you would give us a date very soon, because these two operating without a delegation agreement since 2006 and 2007. Well, you can urge them to sign the agreement, but have you tried to understand their finances? They do not have a delegation agreement, but have you ever tried to continue communication and negotiation with them? Please answer this last question, and then we'll adjourn our meeting today. Well, yes, that is what I've been saying, that it is not ideal, because in the past 10 years, the financial report has not been submitted to us, nor have a delegation agreement been signed. Well, I'll ask the question. So under the current legislation, do you have the power to resolve this problem? Oh yes, we have ultimate methods, maybe not delegating them anymore. So what can you explain why you haven't exercised this authority in the past decade? I hope we wanted to try to resolve this through negotiation, and we wanted to try to talk this out. Mr. Chen, well, yes, the CTC gives authority to monitor it, so and to seize the property. So I hope that you will follow up. We have 1 last minute. Mr. Ho, do you want to ask a question? Well, I don't think 1 minute is enough. I'll leave it to the next time. So the next meeting is on the 27th, Tanya. We would invite Secretary. If you are not free, please send a representative. And FST, please come. Secretary, if you're not able to attend, please send a Deputy Secretary. Thank you. And we would also invite representative from the lands and from the lands department. Thank you.